The second most prolific art thief in history stole from 19 different museums. Breitwieser stole from 201, so there's like $2 billion worth of art. I went back to museums with the world's greatest art thief. I'm like walking through museums with a guy who's, by the way, banned from almost all museums in Europe, who wore a light disguise. And I remember like, what am I gonna do if he actually steals something in front of me? Like, am I gonna just like call the police on my own book subject?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Tribe of Millionaires, your personal access to wisdom from the world's greatest minds, where you'll learn, grow, and succeed with us, building your tribe one story at a time. Today's guest, Michael Finkel, I'm going to read this bio, and it's true. This is the crazy part. He hit a low in 2002 when he was fired by the New York Times, only then to have a man on the FBI most wanted list for murdering his family use Michael's name as his alias to escape to Mexico. After his capture, the murderer, not Michael Finkel, Michael tracked the murderer down, met with him multiple times, and chronicled the events in the book True Story, which was then made into a major motion picture starring Jonah Hill and James Franco. Michael today is a New York Times bestselling author whose recent book, The Art Thief, tells the story of Stéphane Breitwieser, who stole $2 billion worth of art over a 7-year stretch. Another true story you've never heard. Incredible. Michael, welcome.
Wow, thank you very much. You just exhausted me by saying all that, but I'm thrilled to be here.
I exhausted me researching you. It was like, I'll be honest. So I read the book, The Art Thief, which let's just get that out of the way. We'll talk about it more later in depth, but buy the book for anybody listening. It is awesome and is well written. We'll get into your style of writing, which I thought was interesting too. But I buy the book and I'm like, you know what, this story is interesting. I'd love to talk to the author, which is what you do as a podcaster. And then I start researching the author, you. And I'm like, holy cow. I told my wife, like, sometimes there's just happy coincidences in life. Like, the book is great and we could go down that path and we will. But this guy's story is insane. And now I want to spend time on that as well as the book. So it's been fun getting to know you.
Thank you. I'm an open book for you this afternoon. So now you made me a little nervous because usually I'm dealing with people who just kind of just skim the surface, and so I think I'm going to get away with nothing on this podcast.
Well, that sounds like a challenge. Hopefully you get away with nothing. Let's see how it goes. Well, let's start with this. So I heard you once say, in relation to I think getting fired by the New York Times and everything, that if you don't look back and feel a little embarrassed, it means you're not getting better. Can you dissect that a little bit? What does that mean for you? If you don't look back and feel a little bit embarrassed about the work you did, you're not getting better. Do you recall that? And if so, what did you mean by it?
Agree with that to this moment. So I think what would bum me out would be to read something I wrote 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even yesterday, and be like, wow, that's so good. I can't do that anymore. And so I'm an old man right now. I'm in my 50s. One of the great things about writing, as opposed to, say, playing baseball or sports, is that you can literally, I plan on getting better and better at this is such a challenging career, writing, slinging words around. It's not necessarily dangerous. I think I said to you before, I'm not doing open heart surgery, but if I was an athlete in my 50s, there's just no way I would just look back, it's like at my glory days. But I think with writing, you can get better and better and better. And I feel that I am getting better and better. I don't know that for a fact, but yeah, I do look at stuff from that I wrote in college. And then when in my 20s, I'm like, oh yeah, you were just trying to show off how much you know. And so, yeah, there is a vein of, but I'm happy to feel like a little abashed by my previous stuff. So yeah, I agree with that. And maybe that's true for everyone. Like, if you look back and you're like, gosh, I'm better now, that's a great feeling in
Yeah.
anything.
That's a great point. You say you're nothing dangerous, but you spent some time way back when in Haiti, sort of spending time spending time alongside those that were trying to disaffect to the United States, which meant you're in like 10-person boats with 50 people. I mean, really dangerous circumstances. Why, and what did you learn?
So that story about Haitians trying to migrate illegally to America really actually changed my career. I went with a photographer named Chris Anderson, and we spent weeks trying to secure a position on a boat, one of those literally going with a group of Haitians trying to get to the United States. And yeah, when I think about that moment, actually, I like get a little bit of goosebumps. I have made some maybe So I was telling you when I look back, I think my writing is better now, and I think maybe my decision making might be better.
Sure.
Um, I made some ill-considered decisions. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time in the Palestinian territories. But this one in Haiti was, yeah, we got on a boat, which was, by the way, 23 feet long. It was named the Believe in God. So for those of you who are boating, yeah, 23-foot boat. First of all nailed together with like scrap wood, and they stole nails from other boats, which made me think about maybe people were stealing nails from this boat. So a 23-foot boat, I think, would hold about 5 people comfortably, and there were 48 people on this boat. And I remember looking at Chris Anderson, the photographer. We paid for our seat like everybody else did, and they were wondering about us, but we said we wanted to document this, and I thought we were going to sink in the middle of the sea, and we were actually rescued by the United States Coast Guard. And this was back in 2000, and I think about that moment when we pushed off of shore, and I remember looking at the photographer Chris, and I'm like, I hope that this wasn't the last dumb mistake that I make. And I'm happy
Mm.
to be here, sitting here talking to you. But it did give me a visceral understanding of the desires and the efforts and the risks people will take to get to the United States.
What happened when the Coast Guard rescued you? Were they brought back to Haiti, or what happened then?
Yeah, so everybody was arrested, including myself and Chris Anderson, and we were put on the Coast Guard ship, the good ship, the Cutter Forward, I believe it was called, and they were actually confused for a day or two. We circled in the sea. It turns out that I had a U.S. passport, so it's not really illegal to sneak into a country from which you actually have a passport. So they didn't know what to do with us. They sent all the Haitians back to Haiti, and they put myself and Chris Anderson under, I think they called it house arrest in the Bahamas, which was they put us in a hotel room and said, "Don't leave your room," and then left. And then we just left our room and went to dinner. I'm not the greatest of rule followers, but there was a couple of days where the authorities were deciding whether someone with a passport can be technically sneaking into the United States, and they weren't. It's a little bit of a gray area to this day, I imagine.
Interesting. Speaking of not rule following, do you mind talking about, just for context, what happened in '02? You were fired by the New York Times. I know that was a humiliating time for you. Do you mind just sort of going through exactly why and what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not presenting myself as anything close to a perfect person. I am a flawed human being. So yeah, it was my greatest job I ever had, was working for the Sunday Times Magazine. So instead of doing short form daily things, I was able to do long form journalism, which is, you can spend a month on an article, which is my preference to really delve into research. We'll touch upon that later. And so, yeah, I made a fatal and stupid and also against the rules of journalism mistake about I was doing stories on the basically child labor in West Africa. Most chocolate bars that you eat are a product of child labor. In fact, there were accusations of slavery. And to make things, this is something I am embarrassed about and I haven't done since and will never do again. And all my books, we'll talk about this, are insanely thoroughly fact checked. I feel that well, I'll tell you what I did, then I'll tell you what I feel. I combined a lot of interviews together. These are very shy boys, into what's called a composite character. Now, some magazines, if you put a little italic note at the top saying this is a composite character, and make up any quotes, but I sort of combined a bunch of things together and handed it in as if it was one person speaking. And the New York Times is very strict about that, and I knew that, and sort of I made a decision to let artistry sort of overtake accuracy, and I was fired, rightly so, for doing that. And I feel like, first of all, it chastened me. Second of all, it changed the way I write. And third of all, if I ever was even made a mistake inadvertently again, I feel that a second chance is wonderful. A third chance is extremely rare. And so I feel like my books, rather than someone saying, "Why should I believe you?" is like, I feel like I am so careful now that if I'm 99% sure of something, I cut it out. I really I need, for personal and professional reasons, everything to be accurate. So these insane stories we're going to talk about, art thieves and murderers taking on my identity and etc., are, I pay out of my own pocket for extra layers of fact checking just to be sure.
This long late, I mean, this is 23 years ago, 21 years ago, I should say. You still have that fear of being wrong.
No, but I told you I took away some lessons from my from my firing, which is that I choose stories that fulfill the old cliche, "The truth is stranger than fiction," and because these stories are so insanely like literally unbelievable, but yet true, I think it helps to make when you're reading something that's fictitious, then you can go anywhere. But when the fact that it's true, I think should stay in the reader's mind because it is unbelievable. And I think that, in this day and age of whatever Trump called it, fake news and, wishy-washy this, I really like to be as clean as possible. And I think that makes the books better, even though sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish the mother spoke to me, or I wish this person spoke to me. But I think that the reader knowing that it's true, not just like based on a true story, but absolutely true. I think it adds another level of frisson and kind of disbelief and weird feeling when you're reading it that like this really happened this way. And so it has something to do with something with what happened 20 something years ago, but now it's just like I hate to use the word brand, but that's the word that came to. It's my style. It's like it's not based on a true story. Like I really want everything to be clean as humanly possible. I am human. I probably made a few minor mistakes in there, but just the beats of the story. I hire two independent fact checkers to check me and each other. That's how kind of crazy I am about it.
Well, the final chapter, at least on the Audible version of the Art Thief, you answered every question in my head of how did he know that? You know, so everything you talked about in the book that it was like, well, how do you know that? How did he learn that? It was all answered in that last chapter. Very meticulous to your point. So I could see that attention to detail as part of your brand.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but like, how do you know what someone's thinking when they're stealing something? I literally, and also, it was one of the more extraordinary journalism experiences of my life. I went back to museums with the world's greatest art thief. I'm like walking through museums with a guy who's, by the way, banned from almost all museums in Europe, who wore a light disguise. And I remember, like, not only did he go through like every move and every bit of his thought process that he, as he's escorting me through a museum, I'm also actually thinking to myself, there's like a little loop in the back of my head. Now, what am I going to do if he actually steals something in front of me? Like, am I going to just like call the police on my own book subject? I'm happy to report that I didn't have to face that moral dilemma, but it was like, I just remember it echoing in my head.
Wow. Wow. I can't wait. We're going to get into him, but I want to ask
But yeah,
this for
sure.
context, which is who is Christian Longo? Tell me about him.
Okay, so literally at the same time that I was being fired by the New York Times and felt like I lost my identity as Michael Finkel of the New York Times. You can call me Mike, but Michael Finkel's my mom liked the name Michael, and so I always go. Then also, if you're gonna have silly rhyming name like Michael Finkel, you might as when I was a kid, to my utter embarrassment, instead of playing Marco Polo, the kids at the local Y played Michael Finkel, and it like drove me near to tears. But now I've embraced the Michael Finkel
There you go.
rhyminess, but I still call myself Mike. Anyway, so I was fired from the New York Times and felt like I was no longer Michael Finkel of the New York Times. And again, I talk about a moment I'll never forget. I received a phone call from a reporter, and as soon as I picked up the phone, I was like, "Oh no, a reporter!" I didn't want to talk about being fired from the New York Times, and it turns out this reporter had no clue about that. This is happening the same, like literally within the same 24 hours. The reporter proceeds to tell me that a man named Christian Longo was arrested in Mexico for the murders of his wife and three children, and he'd been going around Mexico again. As I gave you a warning, this is not BS. This is true. He'd been going around Mexico telling everyone that he was Michael Finkel of the New York Times, and pretty much the back of my head exploded at that moment.
Did when you met him and talked to him about this, and the movie kind of goes over it, but I'm curious the reality. Maybe it is what the movie showed. Why did he choose you? What did he say? What was his reason for saying Michael Finkel? Just that you were in the news at that time, or something more?
We just got good taste in journalists. So I had one fan. He turned out to be a psycho killer. The truth of the matter is that I mean, Jamie, let's just, not to compare you to a psychopathic killer, but really, Christian Longo told me that I'm just going to say it, he was a fan of my work. And again, Michael Finkel is kind of a funny, rhymey name, and it
Yeah.
sort of stuck in his head. And he told me, if I wanted to become a journalist my whole life, and I wanted to write the type of stories that you wrote, and so I just decided instead of taking on like a fake alias, he decided to become me. Now, I'm not saying he had my credit card and my social security number, but it was actually it was way deeper than that. Like I think that's identity theft, but he did like personality theft. And if
Wow.
everyone's ready to be creeped out just like a little bit more, like not only did he tell everyone that his name was Michael Finkel of the New York Times and that he was on assignment, he met a photographer down there, a German woman, and she believed that she was now on assignment for the New York Times, and those two had a sexual relationship. And I'm just telling you, I'm married happily, but I am never. He was like kind of more successful at being Michael Finkel than me on some level. And so, anyway, after his arrest, the only person, the fake Michael Finkel, wanted to talk to, are we all following this, was the real Michael Finkel, me,
Yeah.
and thus began my incredibly bizarre, disturbing, and many other adjectives besides a first book
You've
project.
got to take some pride in the fact that just the sheer mention of your name puts women in bed. No?
I think, yeah. I mean, listen, I'm super glad I'm not a psychopathic killer sentenced to death. By the way, they commuted the death sentence
I
because
heard.
Oregon
Yeah.
got rid of the death penalty. But still, life without possibility of parole. There is no jealousy between me and Christian Longo, but I do have a face made for radio, perhaps compared to Chris, and he was a handsome psychopath. But yeah, I don't have the moves that the fake Michael Finkel has.
So he killed his wife, 3 kids. Terrible, terrible story. When you
Yeah, yeah.
first met, I'm sorry?
I was just saying tragic. I mean, I might speak with a degree of levity, but of course, I mean, when I think about those crimes, I have a wife and 3 children. Like it's like
Yeah.
I'll start weeping if I don't have like a degree of levity here. Like no disrespect, of course, to the victims. It's like I'm never going to write about a murderer again. It killed me so much.
Oh,
Sorry.
no. I was that's what I was you kinda started to answer my question. What was that
Yeah.
like being in proximity to him multiple times? What was it like in the moment, and what's the lasting impression it's left for you or lasting impact it's had on you?
I mean, I travel the world for a living. I've been in dozens and dozens of countries. I think I've written articles from 60 different countries. I am really happy to tell you and all your listeners that like 99% of everyone in the world is a good person. And it's that
Yeah.
1% that really screws it up for the rest of us. I think the most frightening thing about sitting across in a jailhouse visiting room from a person who killed 3 children and his wife. I mean, it's like, is there a worse crime you can imagine? I'm having trouble imagining a worse crime. Uh, the creepiest thing about it was that there was nothing creepy about Christian Longo at all. And like that kind of gives me chills to this day. Like I want my murderers to have like a swastika emblazoned on their forehead, like
Yeah,
Charles
Manson
Manson.
style. Yeah.
That's an easy one. Like, oh dude, you inscribed a swastika in your forehead. How about I'm gonna cross the street, and that's a pretty clear sign. Stay out of this person's way. But Christian Longo, as mentioned with the photographer, man, like if I met him in a bar, we would shoot pool. He was super intelligent. He was funny. He was personable. Like I got no creepy vibes off him at all. And that's what creeped me out the most. And that's pretty much what I had to say. It's like, psychopaths, some of them become bankers, some of them become murderers. And it's like, I'll just tell you right now, if someone wants to lie, and as I learned from the art thief and other, and you're a trusting person. I think journalists just have to be. I just have to fall into I travel foreign countries. I have to be trusting. But man, there's no real way to tell if someone's. I couldn't tell that he was a psychopath, and so that was the creepiest thing. I wish there was like a way to like tell, like a UI test for psychopaths or something
Yeah, some
like
sort of
that, or a
card they have to carry, something like that.
yeah,
The,
yeah, or some sort of like quick test, like for COVID test, psychopath test. It's like, did the red line come up? Yeah, psychopath. So they don't have that, and so I mean, not to creep out your listeners, but that just is a fact. Like there's a tiny sliver of society that really messes everything up for the 99% of us that are just try to get through the day and be a decent person. I mean, I fail being a decent person like 6 times before breakfast, but I try.
yeah, no, I get that completely. He initially claimed some level of innocence. Did you ever believe him?
So Christian Longo, of course, the fake Michael Finkel. No, luckily, you're asking how I could talk to such a person who I, I mean, that's just the basic facts of the story. Four dead people in Oregon, one live person in Mexico pretending to be someone else. That's not a very good set of scenarios. But luckily in the United States, and I hid behind this for months, innocent until proven guilty, which is a hallmark of our legal system. You don't have to prove yourself. The state doesn't have to, you don't have to prove that you're innocent. You're not guilty until proven innocent. So he told me, looked me in the eye, and again, this is a psychopath and a liar, that he was innocent and that he would prove it to me. And if you
Mm.
remember, I had just lost my job. So I had nothing but time on my hands. And I'm like, I'm going to double and triple and quadruple check everything you say to me. So I said, okay, I will, like a good juror, maintain the assumption of innocence, prove it to me. And we spent a year. And it turns out that, listen, I'm not in jail, but he might actually be smarter than me, but I don't really care because I'm the one, who's living and breathing and, living my life. But I didn't realize, and I'm a little embarrassed to tell you this, but I didn't realize until kind of late in the game, this guy was outplaying me in the chess game between us, and that he was trying to use me as his like jury, and that if he, every time that I found a mistake in his story, I would tell him, and he would be like, "Oh, thank you for pointing that out," and he would like try and explain around it, and I was sort of his sounding board for what he was going to say to the jury, and I'm happy to report that I actually. Whew, like I was being conned, like he was trying to set me up to be acquitted, and he was not. But I called the book True Story, somewhat tongue in cheek, because it a is a true story, and the main character is a pathological psychopath liar.
You almost sound, and forgive me, but you almost sound apologetic for even having done this story or have been part of this. You almost sound like it's a maybe some shame in it. Why is that?
Well, in fact, I think I don't know. Maybe you just have a nice style, Jamie. But I usually just don't talk about this because the whole story itself, because it was like I will fully admit to you that I befriended on some level a
Sure.
murderer, and there are some forgivable things in the world, but that's not one of them. And so yeah, I feel like I need to take a shower when I talk to him, like I feel talk about him. Yeah, it makes me feel a little bit dirty. And if you get fired and you don't even know, and you're like suddenly, like, I didn't run after, I'm not an ambulance chaser, I didn't run after this murder story. I was sort of thrust into the middle of a
Yeah.
spectacular murder story because this guy took on my name, but it still made the whole thing was sordid. And all I would say to people who say, Mike, I can't believe you did that, you became friends with him, you like talked to him on the phone once a week, like, I mean, in the moment I was trying to do the best I could, but it was so um, off the charts. There were no template for, oh, this is what you're supposed to do when a murderer takes on your identity. There's no like guidebook for how to handle a murderer who pretended to be you. So I was really in uncharted territory. And yeah, I think at the outset of our conversation, you're like, you look back in your writing and you're a little embarrassed. I'd sort of look back in that behavior, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I would have done that exactly the same way again. Murderers out there, please take on someone else's identity. I don't really actually want a second go round. But yeah, so you're right. You've read me right. I'm like, but again, before you criticize me or criticize me away, but before you make it like, see what happens. See what you do if a murderer takes on your identity. You'll make some mistakes also.
Well, you've written the book now on how to handle that situation. So while there was none
Well, there
before,
we
there
go.
is one now, right? I think in that, just my take on this, I think there's something very endearing about the idea that you could. Meaning, if you're going to skew cynic or optimist, I'd rather skew optimist. And what you experienced was a human to human interaction with another human being, yeah, be it a deviant human being, it turns out to be. And you stayed, I think, in high integrity to what you set out to do, which was find the truth. But along the way, I mean, I can see definitely how if you're in this interpersonal relationship, you've got somebody who knows how to manipulate, especially it speaks, I think, to a high point of your character, in my opinion, that you could even be open to the idea that this person has some redeeming value. Because I'm sure he did at some point. I don't know what happened to him as a kid. Maybe he was born this way. Who knows? But I don't know. That's my take on it. I don't see it as a shameful thing. I'm sure in the time, and I know in the movie, it kind of painted the picture of like his or the family side was really looking down the barrel at you as being this sort of awful character. I don't know how true some of the scenes were, but I don't know. I felt the need, human to human, between you and me, to put that out there. I think it's a redeeming quality for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess like there's a lot of things that were sort of in the nature nurture, like nature, just like some people are natural pessimists and some people are natural optimists. And I do tend to be a natural optimist, and I do tend to believe you before I before I'm like, before I just trust you. And of course, accept, but verify, it's like, I'll check everything that a person says. So yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. Oof. Yeah, of course, Chris Longo, he could say like, "Oh, I was a great person except for one bad night." But no, I mean, I had another thought in my head too as you were talking, and I remember as I was talking to Chris Longo, which is, when it comes to a psychopathic killer, you have two choices. You can turn away, or you can really look a person in the eye, and perhaps this is also, I was thinking that if there is any insight to be gleaned into like, what does a person like this, what decisions does this person make, like if there's any way that anything I learn can help prevent another Chris Longo, another family being slaughtered, because there were some strange things this guy did that sort of seemed to be the hallmark of a psychopath. That So I convinced myself that maybe instead of just running away and ignoring this person, like people like that exist, look them dead in the eye and see if you could maybe have some unearth something that would prevent more tragedies in the future. And so there was like a vein of like, maybe there's some good to come of this tragedy. Anyway,
No,
thank you.
I appreciate you going through it. Like you said, it may not be something you're comfortable with, but I appreciate you talking through it. And honestly, it takes a trusting type of person to know a trusting type of person. And for listeners of this podcast, a lot are entrepreneurs, investors, and we're in a time right now where many, me included, have invested trusting in an operator to do right by them, and maybe that hasn't quite gone the way they thought. So, in a different way, maybe quite not quite as psychopathic as what you experienced. I think we all understand what it is to feel trusting, and then maybe feel a little dirty for having trusted somebody. But man, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I like the name Sam Bankman-Fried is sort of running through my head. Like there's some people that are just, like that. And gosh, I don't know if I have any advice to anyone, but I would rather be burned once in a while than go through life distrusting everyone. But it's just going to come with the turf. You know what I mean? It's like, it's every once in a while you're just going to be, oh, humanity is really disappointing. But then so many other times, like people invite me into their homes, and these wonderful moments that sort of they do. What is the expression? One drop of poison, ruins the whole gallon of milk. But I don't believe that. Let's just hurry up and scoop that bit of poison out and drink the rest of the milk. It's like,
I
I
like
think I
that.
butchered that
That's a great
metaphor,
point.
but I think people know what I mean.
I think it's great. Um, Jonah Hill plays you in the movie for all of this. How did he do?
Well, I would like to announce to people that are not looking at me that I really pride myself on staying in shape, and I'm not zaftig. I'm like, Jonah was, first of all, great actor,
Yeah,
lovely human being, um, but a little bigger than I am. Both
especially at
Jonah Hill
that
and
time.
James Franco.
Yeah,
He's definitely slimmed down a little bit, and I got two daughters and a son. I have no body comments at all coming from me, but I do work really. I'm not a naturally svelte person, and so I feel like I work so hard to not eat Twinkies every night. Um, I think they're both really great actors. The movie itself certainly wasn't a runaway success because it is a very dark subject, but I wasn't heavily involved, but I actually had like a front row seat watching a Hollywood movie be made, and I thought that James Franco was outstanding. He creeped the heck out of me. And but it was funny, like, I've never been able to watch that movie without literally, not just figuratively, like putting my hands like this and sort of looking between the slits of my fingers, because it's obviously so weirdly personal. So I have no way of knowing if that movie's good or bad, because it just I like put my hands over my face. I sometimes like hide behind the seat in front of me. I've like I don't think I don't I think one time I've watched it all the way through without like having some sort of emotional overwhelmingness.
I'll bet. I'll bet. I can't imagine what you went through, and what that movie must have been like. Did you actually have interactions with Jonah? Did he study you? Did he spend time with you? How did that? Just I'm curious more than anything. How
Yeah,
did that?
yeah, it's kind of fun. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know a lot of stars. Oh, we had dinner together, Jonah Hill and myself, and it was kind of it was a while ago. He was filming The Wolf of Wall Street at that time, a Martin Scorsese movie, and so I got to hear a lot of really fun insider stuff. So this is the only thing Jonah Hill, great person, a little younger than me. I'm not a star, whatever. I don't faint in front of stars. So we had dinner together. The only cool thing I remember, this is like a little detail. that Jonah, we were at a restaurant, and apparently he had been a regular there because he was filming Wolf of Wall Street as well as the True Story. And he's like, he had like a bottle of, he's like, do you want some tequila? I'm like, yeah, let's have some tequila, Jonah. Sounds great. And he has like, I got a special bottle. And he like, raises his hand. This doesn't happen to regular people or journalists. And like, he had a special bottle of Jonah Hill tequila that was like, the label was like signed and all this. And so, I mean, it tasted delicious, but it was like, I just remember, I was like, oh, I don't think non-movie stars get their own special bottle of tequila, but that's it. I got to drink from Jonah's special bottle of tequila.
That's incredible. That's incredible. One last question on this from the movie. I am curious. You kind of alluded to it. There's a scene toward the end. I don't know if you hands over the eyes at that point or not, but there's a scene toward the end where you or the character playing you is talking to Christian Longo through the glass of a prison phone system or whatever. And that scene is essentially you almost intentionally giving him alibis, ways that he can maybe appeal. And then when you had him hooked, at least the character had Christian Longo hooked, you sort of revealed like, no, none of this works. You're a liar. It was a really interesting scene. Did anything like that happen where you were at a point of like distrust, such deep distrust that you wanted to bury him in that way? Do you remember anything like that happening?
So the only difference, that movie was fairly accurate. The only main difference was some things that took place, say, over the course of a letter or on a phone call, jail to home, were portrayed as happening in person for visual reasons. But all the beats were the same, and so I don't. I mean, again, as we discussed earlier, like you don't know how you're going to act in such a situation until it's upon you. For some reason, I thought that I was going to get through to Chris Longo, and that at his trial he was going to confess because he, in my mind, was 100% guilty to killing his wife and his three children. I just thought I was like, please do something good for the world. The victims are going to be there. Just please confess. And at the trial, rather than confessing, I couldn't imagine making something worse, but he made it worse. He basically said that his wife was the real murderer and he killed his wife who killed the child. And it was like, I felt stupid because I can't believe I actually thought this guy might, you know, show a moment of compassion and humanity, but instead he made it all worse. And it was actually my wife who's like, I was upset. I was driving home from Oregon back to Montana where I live. It's like a 12-hour, 15-hour drive. And I'm like so upset. And she's like, I think, Mike, you have to, bless my wife, Jill. She's like, you got to put this in a letter, Mike. You just, this you're a writer. And so rather than in person, I wrote this letter where I just let it all out. I was like, you mother effer, I can't believe it. You're a liar. I know you killed everyone. La, la, la. And I thought that's the end of my relationship with Chris Longo. And again, it was the most unexpected thing. He writes me a letter back. This didn't happen in person, but he writes me a letter back. And this was, remember, he went through a trial and a punishment phase. He wrote me a letter back, and the last thing I expected to hear is what he wrote, which is, "You're right. I'm completely guilty." And he confessed to me. And in fact, I got all these letters, which I wrote about in my book, were part of his appeals. And so his appeals completely failed. So he completely confessed after I wrote this letter. And it was not what I expected. I thought, so it was like, it was also manipulative on some level because he's a psychopath, but which was like, he didn't want to lose his one like contact with the outside world. But yeah, that did happen. He confessed to me before he confessed in a trial or under oath or any of those things. And so he will never get out of jail because I have his full confessions, which I
I
shared
love
with
it.
the
Thank you for
authorities.
sharing all that. I'll move on from Christian Longo. I want to make one stop
Sure.
before we head to the art thief, but another Chris, Christopher Knight. You wrote a book about him called Stranger in the Woods. He's the Hermit, so we can refer to him as the Hermit, so we don't get confused between Christian and Christopher and all that stuff. So this Hermit that you found, 27 years, he goes off the grid in Maine, doesn't even light a fire in the woods for 27 years, not found. He survives by stealing from local camps and that sort of thing for a long time. How in the world did you hear of him and find him?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the East Coast of the United States, but I lived in Bozeman, Montana for about 25 years. I mean, I like to write, but I also love the wilderness and I love being outside and I love camping and I mean, obviously writing besides, journalism is very social, but writing is very solitary. So I have that in me. I just read a tiny squib. I love reading these days on the internet, it's both easier and harder, like news from tiny towns. In fact, that's how, we'll talk about the art thief. Same thing. I just like to read, like, in my mind, it's like the corners of the internet, like the faraway places. So I've just read a very brief hometown paper blurb. It's like 2, 3 paragraphs long, where like every line, like, increased my incredulity. I'm like imagining my eyes like bulging about, like, a man was just found living in the woods of Maine who claimed to have lived for 27 years without speaking with another person, stealing everything that he needed for clothes, food and shelter. And then this is sort of like, I'm thinking this guy's got to be crazy. Is not gonna, you know, he's not gonna be able to talk to me. He's just gonna be mentally challenged. And then the last line of this thing was like, and he also stole thousands upon thousands of books. And I'm like, pretty much two of my favorite things in the world are camping out and reading books, most gloriously both at once. This was like the Michael Jordan of camping and reading. And I was like, I would really like to talk to this guy. And my secret that I'm now sharing with you and everyone else is that, these days when everyone sends a text message or an email or just calls someone's lawyer and says, I want to talk to this dude, a personal handwritten letter really means a lot. Even when I was a kid, my mom made me write personalized thank you notes to everyone who came to my birthday party. Even if thank you for the Lego set. And so I really grew up with, like, you put a pen to a piece of paper if you really want to connect with a fellow human being. If you don't pick up the phone, they're always busy cooking or something like that. You don't text. And so I wrote a handwritten letter to this hermit who was in jail, and I told him, I'm from Montana. I heard your story. Would you please talk to me? And we ended up writing letters back and forth, and then meeting for hours. And that was the genesis of my second book, complete departure from the murderer, but also another very strange and sort of, I'm not afraid to, a beautiful soul on some level, but also a person that a reader could feel that they dislike. I don't like to tell my readers how to feel. I like to just lay out all the facts and let you decide.
Well, yeah, I think you're being modest there. I think your writing style, it's interesting. And I don't want to forget my question on Christopher Knight, but I will say this. It's interesting. What you got fired for was sort of maybe blending fiction with fact. And when I read Art Thief, the thing that I took from it was it feels like a fiction book. And I mean that in the most complimentary way, but it's incredible that it's factual. In other words, I was able to feel different things for this character as the book progressed. I don't think you were necessarily writing, maybe you were writing the book for me to feel a certain way or sort of like pointing me how I should feel. But there was sympathy at times. There was even, I don't know, a sense of what's the word, appreciation, I guess, or at least that's how I felt. And then it was like, you betrayed me, right? Like this character betrayed me as we went through the book. And I think as you write about these characters, you do lay out the facts, but I think you do it in such a way that allows people to feel a range of emotions on it. So I think it's a credit to your writing style, to be very honest with you. On Christopher Knight, did any other journalist write him? Do you know, or was it just you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to brag about. First of all, thank you for everything you just said. And when you write a book, you're I'm literally in like a empty closet-sized room, wondering, is anybody else going to like this? And so, thank you for saying that, because I make these decisions. I think about readers. I don't know what other writers talk about, but I think about readers all the time. And I'm like, I do not want to insult readership. But I can't also pretend that I'm not human. I'm not a robot. I'm not chat GPI. Like, I do have feelings. Like sometimes you know, and I am not shy to put these things in it. And I really appreciate everything you just said. So his lawyer told me that more than 500 journalists tried to get in touch with the hermit. And I'm the only one that he spoke to. And just as a public service announcement, honestly, if Chris Knight is listening right now, the hermit, I am grateful. Thank you for speaking with me. And I might have been, in fact, I think I was the only one of those 500 that actually wrote a handwritten letter and sent it not through his lawyer, but right to the jail. And maybe that made a difference. Maybe it was something else. But yeah, so 499 other journalists did not get a response.
Well, all right, real quick, I want to blend into the art thief, and I want to come back to Christopher Knight, but Christopher Knight, Stéphane Breitwieser, you were the only American journalist he spoke with as well, and then you have Christopher Knight, and I'm sure you've written letters to others maybe that haven't responded. But do you think simply the fact that you're writing handwritten letters, or is there something else that you think you're able to do in order to get a response from these folks?
Well, there's the expression, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And I think that journalists have a bad habit of presenting themselves as holier than thou or more important than thou, or riding up on some, you know, being carried up on some throne, like you are now speaking to the great, XYZ journalist. But so the fact that I got fired and that I'm human and that I've been embarrassed and that I've publicly been, raked over the coals for my own mistakes, is humbling, but also is like it sort of allows you to, I've been interested in people that have committed crimes, and I'm just like, listen, man, I present myself rather than as some holier than thou person, but as an absolutely, truthfully flawed, imperfect person. And it might be also that, and that's not a BS. That's actually who I am. I'm flawed, and you know, sometimes I'm proud, and sometimes I'm embarrassed, and sometimes somewhere in between. I try to be a great father every day to my three kids, and every night I'm like, that one. That was a bad one, Mike. Shake the skets and start again the next morning. And I think the fact that maybe I present myself as also quite human and flawed, maybe inspires people that who are known most for their in their illegal actions. It maybe permits them to answer me like eye to eye rather than feel like they're being interrogated by someone. That's just a feeling that I have, and it probably is true.
That's incredible. With Christopher Knight, the what I understand is you being the irony here, you being very very meticulous about fact checking, is that he may have been your greatest fact checker. Is that true?
Chris Knight, the Hermit, in
Yes, the
terms
Hermit.
of
Yep.
like, yeah. So he was certainly, he spoke to me so eloquently and so kindly, but he was also, I mean, someone who spends 27 years alone. I don't really like psychological diagnoses because basically everyone is so different and the head is so complicated. But traditionally speaking, he's probably on the spectrum of autism. And both the police officers that interrogated him said the same thing, almost like incapable of lying. And therefore had this you know, like hilarious honesty that also like weirdly refreshing. Just like a moment that pops out is my son. I have two daughters and a son. My son's name is Beckett, like the writer Samuel Beckett. And as soon as I told him my son's name, he looked at me and said, "Oh, that's a terrible name. He's going to hate you when he gets older." And I was like, huh, no one I've ever known has said that. I wonder how many people have actually thought that that was a terrible name, which just were too polite. It's like, I kind of like, so when you asked if he was my fact checker, like literally like, when I was reviewing, like, did you threw the keys onto the console and walked into the woods? He's like, I did not throw the keys. I placed the keys. He was so precise that I loved it because I really wanted to capture his story with accuracy, and he was like literally like throwing a key was wrong. It has to be placing, and I loved that. I went over all of my story that I was going to write with him, and he was like fine tuning my very verbiage, and therefore I'm really happy with the way. The Stranger in the Woods, which is the book I wrote about the Hermit, came out because Chris Knight, the Hermit, is quite a complicated, fascinating, and sort of gentle soul who also committed 1,000 felonies at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah. He spent about 8 months in prison, I think, for all of that. And I think as of at least a couple of years ago, there was zero contact between the two of you. Not for any animosity, just he's a hermit. He doesn't he doesn't want to be contacted. But I think you said to him, "Hey, if I did reach out, or if you ever wanted to reach out, here I am." Has there been any interaction with him since recently?
Yeah, you can hear me babble on. Like, you're probably not surprised to hear this, Jamie, that I have a habit of wearing people out with questions. Because I mean, like literally, I could ask you questions from now to next summer because I'm so interested.
Same.
You, you introduced this saying you were, living in the Dominican Republic, and I got a million questions about the Dominican Republic and what it's like for your children, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really fascinated by this, and I'll wear people out. But I also, as I mentioned, I mean, I'm so grateful to people who share their story with me. I do not pay people for their story. They do not have any editorial control. Everything I often say, like, there's no on the record and off the record. If you're talking to me, I might put it in my book. So there's a lot of trust that the subjects of my books and articles place in me, and I don't take that lightly. And so, um, at the end of my relationship with Christopher Knight, who is a true hermit, I said to him, I'm curious. I would love to know what he's doing. And so I said to him, if you ever want to get in touch with me, I will not knock on your door. I will not send you a note anymore. But if you want to get in touch with me, would you please write me a note?" And he said he would. And it has been 2017, like 6 years, and there's been nothing. And if I believe that I will go to my grave without hearing another word from Christopher Knight, the Hermit. And in a weird way, Jamie, I not only like answers as a journalist, but I also revel in the fact that there's some things that are just going to be unknown, and I can live with that in a sort of, not only can I live with it, it gives me like a little smile. Like this is, imagine if I write a book about a hermit and suddenly he's all chatty Cathy and calling me every week, like he's acting like himself, and he's probably never going to contact me again. And I remain curious, but totally respect that.
That's incredible. Did he read the book? Did he give you any feedback on it?
So I sent him the book immediately, just like I sent the Art Thief the book. Generally speaking, in the world, if someone dislikes something, what is it? The only thing that travels faster than the speed of light is, complaints and bad news. I did not hear anything back about from Chris Knight. I had written a magazine story for GQ magazine about Chris Knight, the Hermit, before the book came out. And we actually talked after the magazine article came out. And I remember, I'm not good at imitating voices, but he has sort of that gruff main voice. And he's like, there are things I liked and things I didn't like. But then he said, like, really the most important thing, but I really respected what you wrote. And I'm hoping that he respected the book. I'm sure there were lines that he would be like mad at me for including, but as I said, everything's on the record. And I'm sure there's parts that he wished were written differently, but I'm hoping and feeling that he would respect what I wrote.
Hey, listen up. Are you ready to take your life and business to unimaginable new levels? Not just new levels, but unimaginable new levels. Gobundance is a community for active entrepreneurial men and women who desire to live epic lives. With the Gobundance membership, you'll gain access to high-level trainings, collaborate with high-level millionaire entrepreneurs, get accountability through our GoPods. My GoPod and I have been together for 4+ years. They're amazing, and experience epic adventures around the world. Plus, you get access to Go Wives, Go Couples, access to Fambundance, to continual high-volume deal flow. Join this tribe. Trust me on this. There's a reason I pay my tuition every year. And succeed like you never have before. If you want the results you hear from members who are on this podcast, or even my own results, Gobundance is the pathway. It's as simple as applying and letting me or one of our ambassadors talk to you about what membership looks like at any level. Gobundance.com, apply, and we'll make sure we put you in the right community for you. Join us today. Back to the show. Small town newspapers in the United States are not covering art thieves in France. So how do you stumble across a guy I nor most in this country had ever, well, I say this, that country had ever heard of in Stéphane Breitwieser. Breitwieser, Weiser, I say Breitwieser because I listen to the Audible
Yeah,
and that's in my ears.
yeah.
But how
Breitwieser
did you
is
stumble across him?
Yeah, Breitwieser is a fine way. But I usually, since I did all the interviews in French, but I've anglicized everything. So I guess in America he would be Breitwieser, which sort of runs off the American tongue nicely. But Breitwieser is maybe how he called himself. But I like Breitwieser. It's just sort of like he actually liked me to call him that because I have a terrible French accent. But it wasn't that different than what we discussed about the Hermit. I speak French poorly. I mean, fluently, but with a
I
really,
get it. A
really
bad
bad.
accent.
I mean, luckily, French people, by the way, just like find a thick American accent to be mignon, cute. So I get away with it, and you can sort of listen. You're living in a foreign country, so you can sort of. I'm not saying I changed my personality, but you can kind of like the disadvantages are sometimes offset by advantages. Like I can like be way too personal suddenly in French. Like French people are so formal and so polite, like they won't ask each other personal questions. I know this, but being a foreigner, I'll just like, so how much you get paid for that? Which is like, oh, in France, but oh, the American, he doesn't know. You can get away with
Yeah.
those things. So as with the permit, I read a small clip in a French newspaper. And like this one, talk about head exploding. Like, I mean, museums have been open for more than 300 years. And in the whole history of museums, listen, I spent all of the pandemic reading about art thieves. Outside of war, outside of the Nazis and an army, like the second most prolific art thief in history stole from 19 different museums. Breitwieser stole from 201. So there's like, boom. But that wasn't really like, I read that and I'm like, wow. Then I loved reading about his methods, which was nonviolent, during the day, sometimes with guards in the room, assisted by his girlfriend. And I was like, oh, this is, if he was like shooting people up, it's like, oh, but I was like, wow. But even that wasn't what really sent my brain matter, like, exploding in my writing room, which was like the reason why he stole, which was he never sold anything. He took as much as $2 billion worth of art because he loved it. He stole for love and just hung them up in his bedroom. And that thought of $2 billion worth of art that you risked jail time, prison time, every single time just to enjoy it, I was like, I would need to speak to this person.
So he responds to you. Where was he when you first wrote him? Was he in prison?
So, yeah, I mean, I guess if there would be one word to describe my work style, I would say inefficient. Uh, this project took me, I mean, from first letter to Breitwieser to holding the actual, book in my hand, like, and actually has a heft to it, was 11 years. I was living in Bozeman, Montana, when I came across this little squib, and I didn't know if he was in jail or not. I didn't even say, but he had written ghost written autobiography, and so I just thought I would handwrite a letter. I didn't. Sometimes people feel a little put upon if you like find their personal address. That's also like a little. So I sent it through his publishing company, which forwarded it to him. It took him 8 months to respond to my first letter. I am both an impatient and a patient person at the same time. Um, and coincidentally, by the time he responded to my letter, I had moved with my wife and 3 young children to France. Had nothing to do with the art thief and everything to do, similar to you, with immersing my children and ourselves in another language and another culture. And so Breitwieser sent his response to my letter to my home in Montana. My friend that was collecting my mail in Montana mailed his letter back to where we were living in France. And we wrote short letters to each other for 4 years before he finally agreed to meet me for one lunch. And he said I wasn't allowed to bring a pen or a notebook. And I respected his wishes. And we just met for lunch. And we didn't even talk about art thieving. I think it was just like a personality test. As I told you, everything's on the record, and people aren't being paid for this. But one other thing that I do tell the potential subjects of my book, and it's quite powerful, is that if you don't talk to me, if you don't give me interviews, I'm actually not going to write the book. I need to talk to the person, him or herself. And so that gives a lot of agency to the person. Like if you, there's other writers who be like, if you talk to me, you don't talk to me. I'm writing this book, so you got two choices. Your participation or not. Book's coming out, and I'm actually not that way. I'm like, if you don't tell me everything personally, like, and we're not talking about an hour interview. I'm talking about 40 to 50 hours of interviews. If you don't do that, if you don't agree to do that, I'm actually not going to write the book. So you really have all the power for the moment. And we had a long lunch, and I guess mon français était charmant. My French was a little bit charming, and he agreed to sit for a long series of interviews, and then freaking took me to museums, and it's like went on road trips. So we developed quite a fascinating relationship. It took 11 years. I
The
mentioned.
book explores this really well, the psychology of Breitwieser, why he would, why he wouldn't, concepts like kleptomania and everything else. Does he just appreciate art? I mean, there's so many ups and downs in the story. From your perspective, what's his motivation? What is it? What is it about him that made him? I mean, is it was it the joy? Was it not? Because that's not quite doesn't quite fit the psychological profile. What do you believe his motivation or his inspiration for stealing art was?
Yeah, and so as I mentioned, as I may have mentioned, when people are telling their story to me, um, I do have a BS detector in my mind. Like, people are always, I think right now, even on this podcast, I'm trying to be as appealing as possible. So I'm, trying to manipulate you and your readers into thinking I'm, a good guy who's, you know, I'm going to run out and buy the art thief. You're not seeing me like losing my temper with, with my children or something like that. But I am human, fully human and all. I try and be a good person. But anyway, so in the 11 years that I spent with Breitwieser, we built up so much trust that he gave me signed written permission to see his psychology reports. And we managed to read 5 psychologist reports. And it was really enlightening because how I felt and what I felt he was saying to me, again, 50 hours of interviews, I asked things like 3 different ways just to make sure there's at least consistency. I felt that despite despite the fact that he was a cancer on the public society and was an art thief, and all of us are the victims, we don't get to see these works of art. There was almost no question in my mind that he truly loved these works of art. He really did not try to sell them. He, I mean, I went to museums with him. I saw him weep in front of things. I saw him speak with the most, better than any art professor or tour guide I've ever experienced. He taught me how to really see a work of art. And I was happy to read in these 5 psychology reports, even though each of these 5 psychologists ripped him a new one, called him a brat, completely undisciplined, cancer on society, as I said. But all 5 of them, despite, like, they all had, well, I don't really want to say this, but all 5 of them said, it is clear that we are dealing with an aesthete here, someone who truly loves the work of art. And so it wasn't just supported once, but 5 different times from 5 psychologists. So he really did love these works of art. And that was maybe my favorite part of the 11-year process. I mean, I love his story, the craziness of the thought, the Icarus story, the rise. And then, of course, the closer you get to the sun, the harder you're going to crash, and the massive crash. But if any reader, or let me just talk about myself, like, he showed me, and like, I don't walk through museums or experience artwork the same way because of Breitwieser and his, like, sort of emotion first, intellectualizing second. And I feel like he said to me something to the effect, like, doing a little translation in my French, everyone forgets how to see a work of art after the age of, like, 10. Like, we just start intellectually, oh, look at the colors and the balance of form. But really, like, what's the first thing you see when you look at a Renaissance work? Like, boobies and
Right.
penises. Like, I mean, just admit it. That's what you're freaking looking at. Why? Just don't be shy. It was painted. Those painters aren't stupid. They was painted to be sexy. These are sexy things. A lot of, when you see, when you see, like, these amazing bodies, and they're nude, like, you're supposed to be turned on. They weren't made for you to just intellectualize. And so I really liked that Breitweiser sort of reminded me that thinking about boobies when I'm looking at a Renaissance work is not only, you shouldn't be embarrassed about it, you should be proud of that, because that's what the painter wanted you to do.
Incredible. Any contact with his girlfriend? I know there wasn't as of the time of the writing of the book. Is there any contact there? Will there ever be, or is she just sort of off the grid, gone, not going to ever be part of this?
So Breitweiser started stealing when he was in his early 20s, and he was the child of a contentious divorce. His father, who had beautiful collections of artwork, ivory, antique weaponry, terrible divorce. His father, who had inherited all those things, moves out of the house. Breitweiser cuts off all contact with his father, but also no longer gets to see these amazing works of art that both of his parents said that he was obsessed with and loved. Renaissance art, 16th and 17th century items. At the same time that his father left the family, he fell in love with a girl. Her name was Anne Catherine Kleinklaus. She had no prior record, criminal record, but boy, everyone who knew the two of them said, "Oh, that was an unhealthy relationship." But they also said, just like all the psychologists said, Breitweiser truly loved this work. They all said, "Man, those two really loved each other, and love can make you do crazy things." And they formed this incredible, historically unprecedented art thieving team. Now, Anne Catherine, I won't give away too much of the ending. She got away with it. Way my Brightweiser almost helped her, and she has never spoken with a journalist before, and with good reason. Because if I talked to her, she would be in a weird position where she would either have to just outright lie to me or expose herself to punishment because she had committed perjury. So she did not talk to me, and I sort of respect that. It's like she would have been unintelligent not to, but I got access to her record, her police interrogations, also some of her psychology reports, and I talked to people that knew her very well. And so, you know, it's not a work of fiction. It's not a novel. If there was a novel, maybe I would have more from her perspective, but I worked with what I could. I'm very open with the reader about that, but I felt like I got an understanding of Anne Catherine, but I was not able to talk to her. And to this day, we have not spoken.
Is that, I'm curious, you mentioned before about you wouldn't publish works unless you were able to speak to the subject, and she wasn't the subject, he was. But when you do have to, when somebody won't speak to you in the subject of a story, or that's a subject of the story, is there a minimum? Like, when do you know that you've got enough of a picture painted through police reports and other people that you're able to talk to, and the subject himself giving you sort of like, how do you scratch that itch or satisfy that need to be completely factual? And how do you know when you're there? I don't know if you can even answer that, but I'm curious how you go about that.
Yeah, the answer is that I don't really know. Sometimes when I'm writing, I feel like that guy at a concert with the soundboard where there's like 500 little dials in front of you. I'm like, how does that guy know where every single dial should be? And I think the truth is you don't.
Right. I
And
agree.
so I don't ever know. And I'm just like, I literally, I'm so happy to be talking to you about this. Like, you work on a book, 11 years, and half of that time, almost all that time, I'm like, I wonder if anybody else is going to like this. I mean, I sure hope so, but you don't know. And so you never know exactly. And I would love to just tell you this is I don't know what other writers do. Are they more self-confident? I'm just like, I am trying my hardest. I feel like I have enough. I feel like, another thing I am also, I try to be, especially, since honesty has played a big role in my career since being fired. I'm like right up front with the reader. Like I think on page whatever within the third chapter, I'm like, I did not get to speak to Anne Catherine. Like I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to. I could sort of elide that, and I think other writers might pretend that they know all this, but I'm like right up front, dudes, readers, my friends. I wish that I was able to talk to her, but it's understandable why not. And here's who I talked to. Here's what they said. And if I'm not sure of something, I'm just going to be like, I'm not sure of this, but. And so just being open with readers, and I think they respect that this is a true story, as we talked about earlier. Um, and you can never get everything that you want in the world. But Breitwieser himself, the main character, did spend like 40 to 50 hours answering my questions. And so that was like everything else was a bonus after that. And again, I got every single police report, every interrogation, every trial, and everything she said under oath on the stand. And so there's a lot of material there that was said literally under oath to tell the truth. And so that's pretty powerful. I don't make anybody put their hand on the Bible and say, I swear to tell the truth in front of me. And so that's a pretty powerful stuff. Uh, to get, you can really get a lot of insight into someone for what they say, literally being interrogated by the police.
Well, to sort of make a point on your modesty here, your book, Art Thief, at least at one point was, maybe it's higher, maybe it's a little lower, number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list. And you mentioned a few of the other folks that have books on that same list. It's Paul McCartney. Who else?
Yeah, I mean some Prince Harry, the BTS, the Korean boy band. I'm fighting. I think there should be two categories of bestseller lists, like famous people books and like regular people books. It's like I got no paparazzi hanging out. Anyway, no, I am thrilled beyond imagining that people are seeming to be receptive to the book and are buying it. I've never said oh, just because it's the bestseller list doesn't mean the best written list. And I stand by that to this day. But I wrote it. I mean, I'm pretty much my wife thinks I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I will work something until I believe that it is absolutely the best I can do. If you don't like it, totally understand. I'm sorry. There's lots of other writers out there. But I really try to make it as best as the best thing that I can possibly do, and to have it be well received and find readership is it's really gratifying. And I'm not, no modesty aside, like that is a crazy way to make a living peddling, books. And so, thank you, readers out there. And if you're interested, again, it's like, wow, yeah, it's great to be listed. Who's that Paul McCartney dude? Just stick to music, please. Don't horn in
Exactly.
my books.
Exactly. Where's Breitwieser today?
Yeah, and again, either pronunciation is fine. Um, we're not going to say what happened to all the works of art. I mentioned Icarus, big crash. So he is still under the French. He's in house arrest right now. Fortunately, as I mentioned, he never committed any crimes with violence. And so during COVID, a lot of non-violent criminals were allowed to just wear an ankle monitor. And though he's been in trouble with the law, he is just under house arrest right now in the Alsace region of northeastern France.
Do you keep up with him?
I did actually. This is barely mentioned in the book because the book just came out a couple of weeks ago, and there's a long delay between finishing a draft and actually, trundling a book coming out just in March, which is like 4 months ago. I attended his final trial, and you can never tell. After there had been a couple of year break while I was writing the book, and of course the pandemic, and we weren't able to travel that freely. I was wondering how he would receive me at the entrance to the courtroom. Just this is just in March of this year. There was a I can't remember if they were French or Swiss, but a French speaking camera crew, and they stuck a camera in his face, and he actually like got into a physical confrontation with the media. In fact, charges were pressed, and I was like, wow, he's pissed at the media. And so I stayed away. But then during the lunch break in the trial, I'm like, well, Mike, I'm not the shyest guy you'll ever meet. I'm like, I'm going to go up and say hello. Hopefully, he doesn't punch me in the mouth. And he was, um, I'm neither happy nor unhappy to report. I'm just going to report that he was very sweet to me. He's like, oh, Mike, really good to see you. He had read my magazine article again, just like the Hermit did, and thought it was fair. And he's like, he was warm. So we had a warm greeting, shook my hand and said, I'm glad to see you. And mentioned, like in passing, I have the same email address if you need to get in touch. I don't like to, again, I wear people out, but unlike Chris Knight, who I might never speak with again, I have a warm relationship with Breitwieser. But that's not really my point. I don't write books to make criminals like me. I write books to impart the story as accurately and entertainingly as possible.
Well, you write these books about individuals who you think about Christopher Knight, Christian Longo, which again I feel like that was like thrust upon you. He took your name. Stéphane Breitwieser. They kind of live outside the norms of society. They got this itch they need to scratch in maybe the most devious way. How much of the exploration of these characters is truly just an exploration of your own self, and what do you learn from that?
Well, I mean, I love my career in that I'm kind of a spoiled brat myself. Maybe people said that about Breitweiser, but like I get to write. I don't have a specialty. Like I'm always writing about politics or I'm always writing about science. I've been a full time writer from oh my god for like 33 years now. It's crazy since I've been like 21 years old. Let's do the math on that. And I just write on whatever sort of sparks my journalistic interest. And yeah, I do think about readers when I'm writing. Like I'm not like I've heard writers on podcasts, perhaps like yours, say that they don't think about readers, and I'm like, hmm. I mean, I respect anybody's process, but I do. I think. I mean, like I mentioned, I have three kids. I'm super busy. Like I could have written an 800-page book even easier than I did, but I kept this one like 200 pages long. In fact, it's really like double spaced and like a tiny little, like it's a kind of a cute, almost stealable size. Please don't steal something. Um, uh, so I'm thinking about readers, but I'm also like, yeah, everybody wants the story and it's fun. Like I'm always thinking about people sitting in airplanes reading because that's where I do a lot of time. And I'm like, if you better be able to, I live near Salt Lake City now. Salt Lake City to Charles de Gaulle, Paris. Like I think you can finish the book in that length of time. That's sort of like how long are your books? One international plane flight long. Um, and but also like I feel like a good book, and you'll have to decide whether this is a good book. I like the story. Is not only tells you like an interesting story, but gives you like something like I was mentioning before, like I think it's going to change the way you go into a museum or encounter a work of art. Like there's got to be some benefit for my 11 years of labor. I am, and I agree with all of my books. Maybe the murderer one a little more opaque, but I do feel like I get something fulfilling. I feel like a better person in the end, or I look, and I try to share with the readers like, hey, man, I learned how to see art, or hey, I learned how to be quiet. Can you believe that? I'm babbling like crazy, but I learned from the Hermit how to just shut the hell up sometimes. Um, and yeah, I do get a lot of benefits, ancillary benefits from my research, and even the coolest of the ancillary ones, I try and tuck in the pages of the book so the people that read it maybe can jump in and join me on the fruits of my 11 years worth of work.
I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it. Not just the book, but researching you. A couple of things on my mind. Is there a book that you are in the process of writing on one of these characters you found, and or is there a book you wish you could write but you're not getting traction on?
So I think maybe some of your listeners be like, 11 years, like he's got three kids. Like, how is he supporting his family? So, not being not owning like Amazon, I do have to support my family through writing. And my wife is a professor, so neither of us are, rolling in dough. But so I do write a lot. When I say 11 years, there's other projects that are always going on. In fact, the whole entire Hermit book was written in the middle of this process. So I'm writing a lot of magazine articles always, but I am working on another book. I'll talk about it very, very briefly, but it has a similar beat to the other ones. There was a guy in the 1970s who was involved in a violent crime and then hijacked an airplane. It's not DB Cooper, but it's like that. Hijacked an airplane. And this This is not BS. Literally, like you think this is only in the movies, got $1 million in a suitcase, cash. This did happen in the 70s and then disappeared for 40 years and was found in Portugal. Not only having lived 40 years like an exemplary life, like starting all these, like he was a basketball player, like inner city youth basketball players, raised a family. Nobody knew that he had ever committed any crime, like the
Wow.
sweet person. And so the story itself is interesting, but then I sometimes love, like, you have to have sort of like a deeper theme, and sort of the themes of this project is like, can a person change? Is there redemption, or is this BS and he should be put in jail?
There's the dogs. We talked about it.
Those are my
Mine are over there.
those are my French bulldogs yapping. So this is huh? I don't have a walled in castle in which I merrily type my books. I'm right in the middle. I'm right in the middle of three teenagers, one wife, and two French bulldogs. So there's
Yeah.
silence is. I heard that there's such a thing as that, but it's unfamiliar to me.
It's only between your ears sometimes, right? Last thing I'd love to ask you about. We share the expat thing. I heard you talk about moving to another culture and immersing yourself in it being a lifelong dream at some point, and you executed that. Your kids were about the same age as mine are, 8, 5 years. I think you said we're 8, 7, and 5. Um, I don't know how long you were in France, south of France, but you made that move. I 100% don't need to ask if any regrets because there are none. But, or maybe there are, and you can share that if you want. But maybe expat to expat, or if those considering it, because a lot of folks in our world, in this world that listen, are those that are saying, you know what, I'm building something I can systematize so I can travel the world. What lessons did you learn? What are 2, 3 things that I should know from your time being out of the country for as long as you were? What are some takeaways that you would want to share to anybody that is maybe considering becoming or about to become an expat?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. It's really nice to speak to a fellow expat. No, almost zero regrets. I mean, mistakes certainly. First of all, I'm very blessed in that I have a job, and so does my wife have a job that are portable. Although I think in this post-COVID age, a lot more people have portable jobs. I've always loved to travel, and the United States. I'm American through and through, but even in this interconnected world is a little bit isolated. It's in, like, basically, I mean, we got Canada to the north, which is not radically different. Mexico to the south is cool, but really it's not like in anywhere in Europe, there's like 11 different languages within a day's drive of you. And it's so rich and older. And so um, I think it is. This is we were in France for almost 7 years, and although even as a journalist, I've done some intense trips, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, which is considered extremely long. I never really dipped more than the littlest piece of my littlest toe into another culture, and that over the years, like, there is something cool. Again, if you're listening and thinking, I only get 2 weeks of vacation a year, 1 week, I totally understand. I'm very lucky. But there's something about year after, like, spending years in a foreign country in which, like, you get to dive deeper and deeper and deeper, and it gets richer and richer and richer. And the better I learned to speak French, despite my accent, like, went to many dinner parties in which we only spoke French, like, the more things opened up, and the more I was appreciating things. So really, I love the long term. It was completely opposite than journalistic travel, which is quick hits, quick hits, quick hits. Even like, oh, I spent forever in Afghanistan. It was like 7 months. It felt like forever. And so to spend year after year in the south of France and getting to peel back layers of a complicated culture, I found to be endlessly enriching and fascinating. And even my children to this day, like, we when we meet someone who is struggling with English here in the United States, we completely understand. It's like, oh my God, we know exactly what that feels like. And so it gives you a nice empathy. It's very important for my children, and everyone should realize that the United States is one of 200 countries. Most people do not live in the United States. Whether they're 350 million and there's like 9 million people just back, that's that's like 5%, 95%, 96% of the world is not American, does not live in the United States. And it's good to know that. People know it intellectually, but it's nice to know it viscerally. And I
It
think it's really,
reshapes. Yeah, being here reshapes concepts like racism, border issues. We were talking about it, right? not no right, wrong, not right, left, nothing like that. But it's just like you said, it's a perspective you don't get. And looking back into the looking glass a little bit into the United States, the news or whatever, people shouting from the rooftops about certain things. It is a perspective I have now that I can look back and say like, well, that's not uniquely American, or that is uniquely American, or whatever it might be, right? Like, you're right. You get an appreciation for other cultures. I feel like I cut you off though. I'll let you finish. My
No,
apologies.
no, exactly that. It's like, and again, I'm not like, I'm neither like blindly patriotic, nor am I, one of those people like everything about the United States is terrible. I love my own country, and at many times, like, disappointed in it. But that's the sign of truly, loving something. And I got to see the French public health system, and it's not all great, and it's not all bad. Just you get to see these things, and the only weird scar that my poor children have inherited is that what other Americans think in Celsius? My daughter is like, I'm like, it's 70 degrees out. She looks at me blank. I'm like, it's 22. She's like, okay. I'm like, oh my God. So that's it. My children think in Celsius. I'm sorry for the rest of America. And then my son calls football American football because don't call it American football, call it football. The other thing's soccer. Like he's like, there's football and American football. I'm like, no, 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 no. Football
That's
and soccer. That's it. American football. I'm like, your friends are not going to like that.
That's so interesting. No, I love it,
That's
man.
it.
I really appreciate the perspective. I appreciate all of it. The Art Thief, of course, is for sale. Amazon, Audible, it's everywhere. It's available everywhere. And again, I read it. I'd read it again. I will read it again. It was a fascinating, fascinating read. I don't usually read that type of book. I like nonfiction, and it is nonfiction, but it's got this, like water for elephants kind of feel to it, where I can just sort of escape into a world that seems like it's not real, and then the mind twist is that it is real. And the other part too, just highlighting this, especially for this listener group, which is entrepreneurs and that sort of thing. Like I love the commitment you have to being a pro. Everybody talks about Kobe. Kobe would wake up at 4 a.m. and you spent 11 years researching a book. You fact check the heck out of it. Granted, maybe from some trauma, but still, you fact check the heck out of your work. I really appreciate. I love studying a guy that I can aspire to be like, because I love studying guests for this podcast. So appreciate you coming on, Michael. Where should people learn more about you? Anywhere you want to direct them?
So michaelfinkel.com is my website. There's some things in there. I mean, the Google works. There, I got no secrets. But thank you so much for saying that. I really like. I believe in people's time is valuable, are valuable. And so like I said, The Art Thief could have been 800 pages. It is a really slim read, and that's I just this is how I make my living, peddling my freaking wares. I would be honored. On my website, michaelfinkel.com or mikefinkel.com, I think they both go there. You can read the first chapter, and you could decide then if you like the book. But yeah, I like to write for people who just want to hear a good yarn. And boy, whew, the Breitwieser story is like one of the. I mean, again, I've been looking for good stories for 30 something years. This is like one of the more spectacular ones, and it was, and I got to speak to the art thief himself. He had never spoken to an American journalist before. So thank you for all the kind words. I really appreciate it.
No, I've
Appreciate it.
had a lot of fun talking to you. I wish we had more time, but thanks again for coming on.
Wow,
Uh,
my pleasure. You've tired me out, and you're like a true journalist. Actually, I feel like both pinned to the hot seat and well respected. So thank you very much, Jamie.